Everybody to the museum for today's History for Lunch presentation. Of course, we're also streaming this on Zoom. So for those of you joining us virtually, we just ask that you please mute your microphone and then use the chat for your questions. As always, we'll have our standard Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And also just a reminder that the museum will host 2 more History for Lunches during the month of February. So next Wednesday, February 8th at noon, guest speaker Paul Liu, PhD from North Carolina State University, will provide a virtual lecture on the effects on rural northeastern North Carolina. So that's going to be in conjunction with Crossroads, Change in Rural America, which is our new traveling exhibition from the Smithsonian that's made possible by a grant from the North Carolina Humanities Council and also Friends of the Museum of the Albemarle. And then on Wednesday, February 15th, guest speaker Glenn Bowman, PhD from Elizabeth City State University, will provide a presentation on academics and athletics. Elizabeth City's P.W. Moore High School was Northeastern North Carolina's most outstanding public secondary school for Black students during segregation. And so that presentation will cover the middle period of the school's history, starting from about the mid-1930s and then ending with the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision that ultimately desegregated education in North Carolina. So we have those 2 History for Lunches in February, as well as a special evening presentation on Friday, February 17th at 6 p.m. Author J. Brent Morris, professor of history at Clemson University, will share information and stories on Maroons, their lives and their struggles for liberation. So he's going to be drawing from newly discovered primary sources and archaeological evidence that suggests far more extensive Maroon settlement than historians have previously imagined in the Great Dismal Swamp. He'll uncover really one of the most exciting yet neglected stories of American history. This is the story of resilient, proud, and determined people who made the Great Dismal Swamp their free home and sanctuary, and it also plays a really allied role in undermining slavery through the Civil War. So 3 great presentations coming up in the month of February. We also have program calendars out in the lobby, so you can grab one of those and get some more information. So today we welcome documentarian Marvin Tupper Jones, the owner of Marvin T. Jones and Associates, which is a photography company up in Washington, D.C. He's been published in well-known magazines and has worked in South America, the Caribbean, and Africa. His decades-long career as a documentary photographer has expanded to forms of documentary media. He accomplished this by founding the Chowan Discovery Group, whose mission is to research, document, preserve, and document the 400-plus-year-old history of the land-owned racial people of the Winton Triangle, area centered in Hertford County. Jones has made meditations about the Winton Triangle on national, regional radio and television, in universities, museums, civics groups. He is a native of Cofield, which is a village in the Winton Triangle. He began his project over 2 decades ago by scanning the photograph collection of relatives and neighbors. So the Winton Triangle digital collection now has over 30,000 files of photographs, documents, maps, audio, and video recordings. And his work for Chowan Discovery has yielded awards of excellence from the North Carolina Society of Historians and the African American Historical and Genealogical Society. So Mr. Jones is zooming in today, so I will turn the presentation over to him. Thank you.
And good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm always glad to be working with the Museum of the Albemarle. It's also great that this is the first day of the observed Black History Month of 2023, and we get to open up the month like this. I want to first tell you about Chowan Discovery. And our mission is to research, document, preserve, and present mainly the history of the Winton Triangle area centered in Hertford County and a little bit and we had our big launch in 2009 with the Winton Triangle stage production, which is essentially a slideshow like this one, except we had one Indian nation, the Meherrin Chowanoks. We had 2 church choirs, and we had students acting out historical skits of the Winton Triangle. And it was big fun, big success. Our research is based on archives, family collections, books, the internet, cemeteries, farms, and fee-based sources like ancestry.com and newspapers.com and more. We have resulted in historical markers, talks, and so forth. This is one of our first historical markers for the Chowanoke people. And I'm a Chowanoke descendant, and that's where the Chowan River gets its name from. And that's me you see me with my relatives by the marker. Other markers are in Dare County and in a little city, which I'll talk about. They deal with the 1580s through the Civil War and the 20th century. Some of our markers come out of our writings. Here's an article I wrote about Robert Lee Vann, who was publisher of the largest African-American newspaper in the 1930s, the Pittsburgh Courier. You see him with Bilbo Jangles Robinson and Shirley Temple on a Hollywood studio in 1935, when this paper was the largest African-American newspaper of circulation, that is. And we have a marker for Van on Ahoskie, North Carolina. And he was a native of Ahoskie. We've also supplied a sidebar to the latest Civil War Trails marker in Winton about one of our soldiers, one of our USCTs, Martin Van Buren Reynolds. You'll hear a little bit more about him. And we have begun receiving North Carolina Civil Rights Trail markers. And this is our first one. In fact, it's the very first one of the series from the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. And this is for New Ahoskie Baptist Church. You see me with my high school classmate, Charlie Press Morris. And we have a second one that's in the works that will be dedicated for sit-ins in Kinston, North Carolina. And there's a third one we'll work on, but you'll hear about that later on at another time. Our latest North Carolina historical marker, we have 9 of them, is for Wild's Raid in Elizabeth City. This is when 2,000 African-American soldiers of color marched from Norfolk into Elizabeth City, destroying rebel camps, supplies, and rescuing 2,500 people from enslavement in December of 1863. We placed my church's Rosenwald School, Pleasant Plains School, on the National Register of Historic Places. And our work has supported researchers and authors. We've given tours to history professionals. You see some of the books that we have supplied, where we have assisted the authors with information. And I'm proud of all their work. One of our newest developments is the replacement, is our first historic preservation effort. We're replacing columns at the C.S. Brown Auditorium in Winton, North Carolina. And this is one of the largest Rosenwald school buildings. And in late March, this coming March, we are premiering a new exhibit of 30 panels of Winton Triangle people and buildings. And these are 4 of the panels you see here. So I hope you will visit, and we've won awards. One award I like to mention is the United States Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage. I forgot to add this one to the slide presentation, but the person who made that happen is in the audience today. Hi, Margot. And so I'd like for you to visit TowanDiscovery.org and see all of what we're doing. I didn't know what my community was doing during the Civil War, and I sincerely wanted to find out. And so I began researching, and very little was passed down to us on what my community's role as a mixed race people, mostly free, of what they were doing in the Civil War. And I found plenty, and this is part of the story of what I found that I'm presenting to you. first, to understand the Winton Triangle, our history begins in 1584 when the English came to Roanoke Island and they first heard of our earliest inhabitants, the Chowanoke people, and I'm a Chowanoke descendant. This is the 1585 John White map. You see Roanoke Island with the cursor, the Albemarle Sound just past Elizabeth City. And in 1586, the English returned to Roanoke Island, went up the Albemarle, went up the Chowan River to the village of Chowanoke. This larger inset shows where Edenton is, about where Edenton is, the Albemarle, the Chowan, and the village of Chowanoke, which was the largest Algonquin town in eastern North Carolina. These other maps, the larger map of North Carolina shows Hertford County in red, and a closer look at Hertford County with the Winton Triangle, the estimated land ownership in the 1960s in the beige shaded area. And now historically, the Winton Triangle is a community of mixed race land owning people. I'm related to a lot of people in this photograph. And land ownership definitely begins by people of color. In 1741, when William Weaver and Thomas Archer, who were connected, they could have been related, they both acquired land on creeks in Hertford County. And then other families like the Manleys, the Halls, the Nickenses, and others followed, and many of their sons served in the War of Independence. The community continued to expand, and one big moment that may have had a check on their expansion, temporary check on their expansion, was the Nat Turner Rebellion in neighboring Southampton County, Virginia. And every time I drive from Winton to the Winton Triangle, I pass through Boykins and past the Nat Turner insurrection marker placed by Virginia. The oldest document in my family was generated by the Nat Turner Rebellion. It belonged to my great-great-grandfather, Noah Robbins Sr., and this is the document, and I'll read it to you. Noah Robbins, a man of color, have made application to this court to grant him a certificate certifying that he is a free man and a native of this county, and in proofs being rendered to that effect, it was then and there ordered that the clerk of said court should give to said Noah Robbins a certificate certifying that he is a free man of color and a native of said county and entitled to all rights. I need to move my window around because and privileges of free persons of color. And it's dated 4 days after the rebellion. About 20 years after the rebellion, there was a renewed push to establish a church in the Winton Triangle, particularly the Pleasant Plains sub-community. And you had pre-war leaders that were pushing for this, like Sally Jones Weaver, Willis Weaver, Sally's brother Wiley, and Mary Jones. And in 1850, a contract was signed with Willis Weaver's brother to build a chapel. And the church, Pleasant Plains Church, was founded in 1851. The chapel you see here is the second one, built in the 1870s. Now, 10 years after that, the Civil War began. And a year after it began, in February of 1862, the United States Navy gunboats came up the Chowan River after retaking Hatteras and Roanoke Island. And the gunboat leaders had intelligence that there would be Union sympathizers that would greet them in Winton. However, apparently they were flushed out and rebels had taken over. And the rebels had taken one of our women, Martha Keene, whose father was a founder of Pleasant Plains. They put had her to wave a cloth for the leading gunboat, the Delaware, off on February 19th. Here is the mark of her father-in-law, Jesse Keene, from the contract. The commander of the Delaware saw muzzles of cannon and rifles in the hills above and turned the boat around right at the wharf. And as it sailed away, it received 185 shots, but no one was wounded. Martha Keene was not caught between two sets of gunfire, and the gunboat sailed away, returned the next morning, and began shelling Winton. And Winton was burned. So many of us grew up with this story, but Martha Keene is always ignored. So with the help of a genealogist friend, Alice Harris, I found that Martha Keene was a 35-year-old married woman with 3 children. The rebels claimed that they paid her to be on the wharf. I claim that they forced her, whether she was paid or not, to be on the wharf. Otherwise, she wouldn't want to be there. She had too much at stake, nor would her husband want her to be at the wharf. You see in the photograph a cannonball from the shelling. Well, the good news is Martha Keene did survive. 7 years later, her daughter's at Hampton Institute, a place that just would not exist without the United States winning the Civil War. Somebody's microphone is on. And a year later, Martha Keene's daughter is a teacher in Winton. That was just amazing. And Martha Keene lived until World War I. Wiley Jones, who is an ancestral uncle of mine, was in a tree watching Winton burn, and I understand he was celebrating it. He was rooting for it because that was Liberation Day. That was a day when people could escape enslavement. Free people would begin to have freedoms they didn't have before, and rebel forces would be leaving Winton. And from then on, Winton was sort of a no man's land that wasn't fought over, but whenever a Union gunboat showed up and they controlled the Chuan River for the rest of the war, rebel aggression and intimidation was tamped down quite a bit because the gunboats would show up and the soldiers would spread out. But it also allowed men of color, everybody, to escape rebels. It allowed them to get on the guns, sail away, and enlist. And here's a list of some of Winton Triangle men from the same families in the same regiment, the 14th Heavy Artillery U.S. Colored. And among the soldiers is Martha Keene's brother-in-law, Joshua Keene, who is also a Weaver cousin. So I'm related to Joshua Keene and Keene's husband. And again, he's in the 14th. You see 2 Collins brothers, you see some Lewises, you see 2 Manley brothers, several, quite a few Reynoldses, 2 Scott brothers. You see a list of a lot of Weavers. So I had a lot of relatives who served in United States forces in the Civil War. If we particularly look at those that were in the 14th Regiment Heavy Artillery, you'll see a in-law, Samuel Walden, at the top, and you'll hear about him and his brother later. And then you have these other Weavers. And many of them in the 14th served as garrison soldiers and laborers in Morehead City and in Beaufort. 2 of the Weavers died of disease. They were not combat soldiers. But most soldiers in the Civil War died of disease. One of our soldiers, who was Sergeant Enoch Luton, wrote a letter to her husband, and I found it in the pension record. It said, "Dear Madam, I now seat myself as to let you know that I'm in common health, and all the boys are living. Richard R. Weaver are dead, and your husband, Samuel Walden, also. He lived about a month after he got to the regiment, and he requested that I should write to you. A few months after I found this letter, I heard from Enoch Luton IV, who was inquiring about his ancestor, and we exchanged. I gave him the digital copy, and he gave me a portrait of Enoch Luton. And as you can see, here's Enoch Luton's signature. A lot of Winton Triangle men were literate, despite a prohibition after the Nat Turner Rebellion on people of color being educated. Quite a few of them were illiterate anyway. And this is Samuel Walden's widow, Nancy Weaver Walden, who is the daughter of Willis and Sarah Weaver. It took her 57 years to get the pension. When she received it was all in one lump, and it said that she had a heart attack and died from seeing the large amount of back payment. Of course, she was also about 80 years old at the time or more. She had already remarried, and all of her children were grown when this happened. And then you had the Reynolds family in the 14th Regiment. And I'll talk about two of them. Thomas Reynolds. In his pension folder, his comrade, Matthew Walden, who was probably related to Samuel Walden, writes, I was with him when 29 of us run away from Hertford County, NC, to get to the Union lines. It was in February of 1864, and we were about 3 weeks getting to Plymouth, NC, about 60 miles from Hertford County. I remember we came on a boat called a Bombshell from Catherine Creek on the Chilwan River. Catherine Creek is now called Tunis. It's only 4 miles from the farm where I grew up and that we still have. And I used to bike from my father's store to Tunis whenever I requested a 45-minute break. And it's always a delight to be at Tunis on the Chilwan River. Another family is Bazell Collins' family. John Bazell was 40 years old, had a wife and children. I believe intimidation and from rebels, the seizure of his labor and of his produce from his farm forced him to enlist, and 2 of his nephews joined him in the 14th Heavy Artillery. Another nephew of his, Thomas Collins, served in an otherwise all-white Pennsylvania regiment. And there were men of color who were assigned to white regiments. Thomas Collins was wounded at Cold Harbor, Virginia, and he returned to become the first pastor of color at Pleasant Plains Church. His brother John Collins applied for a pension and supported other veterans in their pensions. And so did his brother Simon, who became a teacher and also was head of the local Grand Army of the Republic chapter in Winton. And the Grand Army of the Republic was a Civil War veterans organization of those who fought for the United States. And again, both brothers testified for the pensions and the pensions of other applications of other soldiers. Here's a letter that Simon Collins wrote to William David Newsom, reporting on the school where he was teaching nearby in Harrowsville. And there's Simon Collins' signature. And then in the 2nd Cavalry, 2nd Regiment Cavalry, USC, United States Color, you had Levi Brown. Levi Brown donated land to my high school. You have Martin Van Buren Reynolds, who's buried on our farm. And then you have the Robbins family, 2 brothers and a cousin, and Samuel Walden's brother, James. I'm related to most of these soldiers. And their first action was in Suffolk in April of 1864. And you'll hear about that later. They also served in Richmond until the war's end, and then they were sent to Texas around the time of Juneteenth. This makes them Juneteenth soldiers. They were on the Mexican border, and they were there as a check against French aggression. The French and other were had taken over the palace and government of Mexico, and you had Mexican Republicans who were trying to remove them, who did remove them actually, and they were led by an Austrian prince. The French were. Now we'll talk about my family, the Robbins family. You had John Robbins in the 2nd Cavalry. He enlisted in January, and he fought until the end of the war. He was in the Battle of Suffolk. And in that battle, he was in hand-to-hand fighting, fell off his horse. Well, he fell off his horse and got into hand-to-hand fighting and was slashed by a saber. And it was several months before he received any medical treatment. He served along with his cousins Parker and Augustus. And again, he served in Texas as well. And you'll hear more about his story in this next slide. I will mention the date. This is from his pension letter. I will mention the date of the 9th day of April, 1864. It was a total loss of my right eye through a saber wound inflicted by the enemy in this skirmish in Suffolk, Virginia. No U.S. Army surgeon or assistant was present for 3 weeks after the fight. I healed the wounded flesh myself in 3 or 4 weeks. The broken bone was very painful and not healed for a great length of time. My right eye has almost failed. It has been over 10 years since I failed to hold office on account of my failure of eyesight. His application was supported by one of his officers who had, by this time, become the first Attorney General of South Dakota, Robert Dollard. Robert Dollard writes, John H. Robbins was wounded. He remembers distinctly the remarkable escape from death of said Robbins in the struggle where he was wounded, that he was struck on the head by his assailant in a hand-to-hand conflict in which we were all engaged with a saber. And it was at that time regarded as miraculous that he was not instantly killed thereby. He also writes, Donald also writes, I am glad to support your claim for a pension with my affidavit of the facts connected with the remarkable struggle of your personal encounter at Suffolk. It is proper that I should be able on this day to pay some slight tribute to a member of a company that 26 years ago today at Jones Bridge on the Chickahominy River did itself and the race to which its rank and file belonged a credit that ought to be imperishable in history, although injustice has denied such a place. Robert Dollard. To understand what it took to defeat slavery and to keep America whole and the contributions of those that served in Richmond, I want to show you what Richmond looked like after the war. It took destruction of a city to defeat slavery, to expand freedoms in America, and to keep America one place, one nation. John Robbins' cousin, Parker David Robbins, became a sergeant major. He was from a Chowanoke mixed race family community in Gates County, which is on the Chowan River. His regiment, again, fought from Suffolk to Richmond. Again, he served in Texas as well. After the war, Parker was a state legislator, a postmaster, a holder of 2 U.S. patents, a sawmill owner, a house builder, a steamship builder and owner. And as a highway historical marker, thanks to Chowan Discovery, dedicated to Parker David Robbins. And a lot of these soldiers were connected not just by war, but by family connections. He married into the Collins family in 1858. You see his 2 brothers-in-law, Simon and John, and then his wife, their sister, Elizabeth Collins Robbins. This is a letter. This is one of his letters you see, and also from his patent for a saw sharpening machine. And when North Carolina produces anything regarding the Civil War. They usually, the Department of Cultural Resources and other educational institutions, they usually use Parker's portrait, which is in possession of the North Carolina History Museum. And so he's quite popular in North Carolina history, particularly when they're talking about soldiers of color in the Civil War. And this was the day that his marker was dedicated. We had reenactors that attended. In 2012, the marker is in Magnolia, North Carolina, only half a mile from his grave. And you see me and some cousins, the mayor of Magnolia and Dr. Stacy Blunt on the left from Fayetteville State University at his grave. And I visited from time to time. Also on that day, 52 drawings by students from Duplin County, again, were displayed, showing all the roles in his life, in war, in invention, in agriculture, in commerce, in construction. His brother, Augustus Robbins, was quartermaster sergeant. Both of them had about the highest ranks you could get for soldiers of color in the Civil War who were not physicians. You had physicians who had officer rank rather than non-commissioned officer rank. And Augustus was in the same regiment as John and Parker. After the war, he served in the U.S. legislature. He was a store owner, a carpenter, and a postmaster. He founded a church, which is still in service. He founded a high school, which is now part of Bertie County High School. His son became one of the first physicians of color in North Carolina. And then we get to John Parker and Augustus's cousin, my great-grandfather, Andrew Jackson Robbins, who became a corporal in the 34th Regiment. And again, he was from a Chowanoke mixed-race community in Gates. He served on Morris Island about a month after he enlisted. Morris Island was at the mouth of Charleston's harbor, and they both labored on forts that destroyed Charleston. They both fought in the Battle of Honey Hill and Ashepoo River in South Carolina. After the war, Jack became a prosperous farmer with 15 children. His youngest three graduated from college, and one was a physician, and he named his first son after Parker David Robbins. Parker David Robbins, the younger, is my grandfather. Here I get the opportunity to show you his promotion paper, his portrait, and his signature. Again, he, like many of the Robbinses, were literate. Were literate. Change that. To show the relations that he had in his life, when I give this talk, I usually send out this flyer, and I show his photograph. On the left of this flyer, I'd like for you to note all the relations that he had. He was the father of 15. He was the husband of 3 wives. He buried 2. I'm descended from the first wife. He was a farmer. We still have part of his farm, and cousins have most of the other farm as well. So we all still farm owners. He was a deacon. He was a son-in-law of a sailor. He was a brother-in-law of soldiers, a cousin of soldiers, a brother of a soldier, and of course, a soldier himself. His brothers-in-law, there was Andrew Jackson Reynolds, who was also a president of the Grand Army of the Republic. His neighbor, James Walden, was also president of the Grand Army of the Republic, the local chapter, and James Walden was Samuel Walden's brother. You had soldiers testifying for each other. This is where the Collins brothers were supporting Andrew Jackson Robbins's pension application. And then we get to Jack's brother, Noah. And Noah, let me move this window around, this Zoom window around out of the way. Noah was in the same regiment as Jack. They both worked on the forts that destroyed Charleston. They both fought in South Carolina. They were both from Gates County, of course. One interesting thing is in the summer of 1863, Noah received a pass from the Provost Marshal of Suffolk. The late Harry Jones, who was curator of the African American Civil War Museum, told me that for Noah to have this document from the Provost Marshal, a pass from the Provost Marshal, probably meant that Noah and members of the family were supplying important intelligence for United States forces in the area. It also may explain why Parker and Augustus were promoted so quick within a week of enlisting in U.S. forces. Of Noah's pension application, it was testified he contracted measles, resulting in disease of the lungs in consequence of the exposure and hardships then and there. He worked on fortifications then in the following manner. Troops had built a battery. His injury came from straining himself while at work on fortifications. And so that was how Noah and Jack contributed to the destruction of Charleston, and again his Charleston in 1865. I'm showing this to remind you, this is what it took to destroy slavery, to keep America whole, and to expand freedoms in America and opportunities. So down my end of the road, outside of Coalfield, you had 3 farms that were owned by USCTs all next to each other. You had Andrew Jackson Robbins's farm, which is ours. Next to it was his brother-in-law, Martin Van Buren Reynolds, who was also the brother of Andrew Jackson Reynolds. And my father later bought Martin Van Buren's farm, so this cemetery and land is now part of our farm. And then on the other side of Martin Van Buren Reynolds' farm, where you see the automobile is, that farm belonged to James Walden. And James Walden and Martin Van Buren Reynolds, Parker, Augustus, and John all served in the same regiment, the 2nd Regiment. They were all Juneteenth soldiers. And every time I go home, and much of my life, I pass Martin Van Buren Reynolds' cemetery, and it's always well cared for. His neighbor, James Walden, again served with the Robbins cousins. And they both married, he and his brother married into the Weaver family. James Walden co-founded 2 schools, including my mother went to both. My father went to one of them, C.S. Brown High School. I went to C.S. Brown School for 9 years. It was a 1 through 12 school, and I went there for 9 years. James Walden was also president of the local chapter of the Grand Army of the Republic. And for 7 years, one of James Walden's daughters, Annie, was reared and educated by John T. Reynolds and his wife, Lydia Ward Reynolds, both Freedmen's Bureau teachers. Lydia, John Reynolds was Lydia's 2nd husband. Her first husband was a USCT soldier who was also named John Reynolds. James Walden married Millie Weaver into Willis and Sally Jones Weaver's family. Samuel Walden had done the same. And most of the 7 Walden daughters attended Shaw University. Walden became treasurer of Pleasant Plains Church, which was the most influential church of color. You had all these landowners who were educated, who were multi-skilled, who were also expanding in the stores and other enterprises. And again, he was the founder of 2 schools. He donated land to found the Walden School, which was on his property. And here you have John and Henry Cumbo, who grew up next to the school and who built a model of the school that they attended. And this is, my mother attended the Walden School as well. The second school Walden was involved in is now called C.S. Brown High School STEM. It started out as Chowan Academy, and then for the longest time, Waters Normal Institute in Winton. And James Walden bought voting stock in the organization that founded the school, the Chowan Educational Association. It was the first standalone high school for students of color in North Carolina. That meant it was not attached to a church organization or a government or a college. Hundreds of descendants of Winton Triangle soldiers attended and taught at Waters Institute, which is now C.S. Brown STEM High School in Winton. John Collins worked there. His son, John Francis Collins, graduated from there and went on to found a law school in Washington, D.C. And then when the school had its centennial in 1986, my siblings and I came home for this wonderful event, and I photographed quite a bit of it. It was held on campus. And in this photograph, you see Alice Jones Nickens speaking. And who is Alice Jones Nickens? She is the great-granddaughter of Wiley and Mary Jones. She's also the granddaughter of James and Millie Walden, and the photograph inset in the middle, and the great-granddaughter of Sally Jones Weaver and Willis Weaver. This is how we kept passing on what our parents gave to us. We built on their shoulders. We use our multiple sets of skills. And one of those skills is building and keeping relationships. And that allowed the Winton Triangle to be successful for so long. And I was glad that I grew up in it, and I'm glad I'm able to relate its story to anybody who is interested. And so I want to thank you for this opportunity to tell you about our soldiers, what they accomplished, and what came out of, and some of what came out of their efforts. I hope I've stirred some questions from you, and I look forward to your questions and your comments. Thank you. Now, this is where I have a question. Is anybody there?
Yes. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Jones? Yes, in the back.
So how did your family contributed to the foundation of the school, right?
Repeat that for me.
If your family contributed to the construction of the school in the last part.
Well, James Walden was a relative, and members of my family contributed to C.S. Brown, what is now C.S. Brown. It took farmer carpenters donating their carpentry skills. It took Levi Brown, who I don't think I'm related to, donating land. Not only in the construction of the school from the beginning, but also supporting it even up to this day. Even up to this day, a lot of members of my family founded Pleasant Plains, and Pleasant Plains was a central church that founded Pleasant Plains School, and Pleasant Plains School is the parent school of C.S. Brown. And so my family really participated in 3 schools rather than 2.
Thank you. And I think that one last question. It's about how were you able to decipher the letters? Because I know the way they wrote was very different from how we wrote, and how to make sure you was able to understand what they were trying to say in the letters.
So she's asking, how were you able to kind of transcribe that handwriting and be able to understand the meaning of those documents?
Some of it was ethereal. I called on the spirits. No, I guess I just read them carefully. I've done a lot of transcriptions, I don't really find the handwriting that difficult. I've found other handwriting almost impossible, but the documents I've shown, I found fairly easy to read and transcribe.
She said, thank you. We have one question on Zoom here asking, how long did it take you to do this research?
Oh, I began over 20 years ago. It must have been over 20 years ago. I began scanning the Robbins family papers. And also in 2001, Pleasant Plains Church was celebrating and observing its 150th anniversary. And I designed the program booklet for that wonderful event. I asked family members of the church who were buying memorial pages to come to the church, to the fellowship hall, and allow me to scan photographs so I could design the pages for the book. And they paid $50 a page, which paid for the printing of the whole booklets, several hundred copies. And I got to see what these families had, and I began to ask them afterwards to let me scan even more. Some of the scanning I did on the kitchen table, some I was loaned, the first collection was that of my parents and my aunts, but because I'm well known and I grew up around so many nice people, they scan their collections.
Yes.
And I grew up around a lot of good storytellers.
Were the letters private collections or a mix of private and stuff that we found in life? Where did you find those letters?
Yeah, so she's asking, were the letters all in private collections, or was it kind of a combination of repositories?
Well, Sergeant Enoch Luton letter is in Samuel Walden's pension folder at the National Archives, for example. So is Robert Dollard's. Robert Dollard's is in the his letter or affidavit is in the National Archives. Parker Robbins wrote a couple of letters to his wife that exist. I didn't present them in this presentation. They're in another presentation, but Cousins let me have digital copies. The 1831 Freedom Certificate, now certifying Noah Robbins, who was already a free man, that certifying his freedom, that was me. I'm the sixth member of the family to possess that document from 1831 to 2023.
Yes.
So did all of the receive pensions?
Did all the people who serve receive pensions?
No. And also, a lot of people didn't apply for pensions. Part was your health reasons to be approved for a pension. You had to have a physician to examine you. You had to have people to testify for you, like Conrads and neighbors. How long they've known you. Whether you were married, children, even if you had widows, how has your health changed over the time that the person testifying you has known you? I knew him. He was very healthy, very vigorous, a hard worker, and now he has trouble. I think it was even more difficult for soldiers to apply and receive pensions if they had been enslaved and illiterate and not having access to literate people. You had a lot of soldiers, I think, that never applied. and some died before they can even get to the point to apply for a pension.
One question on Zoom is Archbishop Curry of the Episcopal Church is grandson of a Winton woman. Is he also a part of your family? I'm sure he would be fascinated to hear of your amazing work.
I'm trying to find out who he is descended from, who his grandmother. I think I know who his grandmother is, and his grandmother was from Renton, but I can't find out much about it. He and I will have to talk. That's all there is to it. If you could put me in touch with him, I would love to talk with him.
And then Cynthia asked, what are some of your best sources for verifying information that your family members provided?
In 1972, members of the Robbins family did a family tree. They opened up a shopping bag, a brown shopping bag, on a picnic table. It was at a cookout, and they began assembling this family tree. And 25 years later, I took a large 4x5 camera and copied it so I could get the best resolution possible, scanned it. In checking census records, I found that they were accurate. I found that there were no discrepancies on connections. There was one person at the very top who I cannot find, named Kern Weaver, who probably was from Gates County. His daughter married Noah Robbins, who had the Freedom Certificate. But everybody else I could verify in pension and census records. And then there are other kinds of records that appear as well. I found out that Augustus Robbins' son was a medical student at Shaw University. I later found out he did graduate. So if you check a lot of sources, you can cross-reference. And my brain for cross-references isn't that bad. So, and I do try to find more than one source. But sometimes one source is all you got to go with.
We have a question from Charles Parker. He said 34th and 35th Colored Infantry, mainly from Roanoke Island area, also were sent to Bravos. So my question is, if some of these unit members stayed in the Army, would you consider them the beginning members of the Buffalo Soldiers?
You would have to know. I haven't researched the Buffalo Soldiers, the 10th Cavalry, and I don't know who became part of that. All I know is about the soldiers I talk about and I've researched. The Buffalo Soldiers are outside of my area of research.
And then Mary asks, have you shared?
And I think everybody wanted to get out of Texas because it was hardship out of southern Texas. There was lack of firewood, lack of water, lack of vegetables, a lot of pests and a lot of racism. So they could have returned back east. Whether any of them went to the 10th, I don't know.
Have you shared your research with school students in the Chowan Triangle area?
I am speaking for the second time at C.S. Brown on Monday. I spoke at our local community college, Roanoke Chowan Community College, in October, and I'm opening up the exhibit there in April. I do several presentations in that area yearly.
And then our last question on Zoom is, did I understand you to say that one of the Winton Triangle descendants served in the North Carolina legislature in the late 1800s?
Yes, that was Augustus. Well, first his brother Parker served from 1868 to 1870, and then his brother served from 1882 to 1884. We also had William David Newsom, who served along with Parker Robbins in 1868, 1870. And William David Newsom was the first school teacher at Pleasant Plains School. He also oversaw 3 other community schools and received Freedmen's Bureau funding for those schools. So there were at least 3 who served connected to Winton Triangle, who served in the state legislature in the late 1800s, in the latter half, or after the war.
Yes.
Yeah, the gentleman who got the certificate of freedom, how was he able to get that? How do you go about getting a certificate of freedom?
So the gentleman who got the certificate of freedom, they're wondering how did he go about getting that? Like, what was the process for that?
He probably had to go down the road to the magistrate. The magistrate might have already known his family because the Robinsons had been there before the English even came. Had been in Gates County even before the English came in 1584. And apply. It was required anyway in North Carolina, but not everybody would bother to get that certificate. But once the rebellion began, it became imperative. You needed it for your own protection. And so the magistrate probably already knew him and knew his family. My village of Coalfield had a magistrate when my father was growing up. And the magistrate, of course, knew my father, knew my grandfather, knew my family and everything.
What made you eligible? How did you become eligible? If you were a slave, how did you become eligible?
So she's asking, how did somebody who was enslaved become eligible to get a certificate?
Well, most Winton Triangle people were free because their ancestors they had either white or Indian mothers who were already free, and the status of the mother determines the status of the child. And so mother was enslaved, you would be enslaved yourself, and you would have to find ways to buy your freedom, which is not a large part of the Winton Triangle story. But there are plenty of stories of women and men and women who have bought their freedom and then went on to buy the freedom of their families. Some, believe it or not, were not allowed to grant their own families freedom papers once they bought them. And so you might find African Americans who are listed as owning slaves, 1 or 2 enslaved people, they may have officially owned their family. I know John Hope Franklin wrote of a woman who bought her own freedom, then bought her father, but was not allowed to grant him freedom papers. So when the census or any other record is taken, she is shown as owning someone, and that person that she owned is her father. She may allow her father to do as, and live a free life, but officially he is not free. They may let a white person give someone freedom papers, but the authorities may not let a person of color give another person of color freedom papers. The thing about racism, the rules always change. You can safely drink a Coca-Cola in a spot at 9 o'clock, and at 9:10 you can get in trouble for drinking a Pepsi there, depending on who comes along and makes the rules. And so getting freedom was always difficult, even when you had the means. And also you had people that had freed themselves that were re-enslaved. You had free people who would be kidnapped and enslaved for the very first time.
Any other questions? Yes.
Are you planning on, with the research you have found about your family, are you planning on publishing it as a book?
So are you planning to publish the research, your research about your family in a book at any point?
Eventually, I seem to be bogged down with a lot of projects like the exhibit, which tells a lot of the Winton Triangle story, at least from the Civil War up to the 1970s. I have written quite a few. There are some papers you can download on writings that you can download on the Winton Triangle website. There are video links that you can go to on the Winton Triangle website, and there may be more, and there will be more. I think once the exhibit project is winding down, I think, and I have a documentary to produce about the C.S. Brown Auditorium. And some other projects, perhaps I could begin writing. I do have a timeline, a Winton Triangle timeline, which serves as an outline for writing a book. I wouldn't mind having an agent. If you know of a good agent out there, or good agents. I'm not going to ask for one. I'm asking for several good agents to talk with me. So that would help allow for a book. And the book would need to be illustrated because I have a lot of images.
Thank you.
You ever do anything with public broadcasting system in North Carolina?
Do you ever do anything with public broadcasting in North Carolina?
Yes, when Frank Stasio had the State of Things, I was on 2 segments of that. In fact, those links are on the Tawan Discovery website. If you look under presentations and broadcasts, you will see those 2, and you will see other links as well. Those are at least two that I've done with North Carolina Public Radio. And of course, if you have connections with UNC TV, I'd be glad to talk with them. It helps to have connections. So I invite all of you to open doors to help present me with an open door.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
My
And thank
pleasure.
you all for attending.
I wish I could be in the auditorium with you and see all of you personally.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending, and we hope to see you all here next Wednesday for our next History for Lunch. And thank you, Mr. Jones, for everything today. That was a wonderful presentation.
And thank you, Noah, and thank you, Lori, and thank all of you. All right, take care.
You too.
Go great.
Yeah. Have a good day.
Right.